Oh, hey, I didn't see you there. Consuming this internet content over a potentially vast distance. Oh, me? I'm just pondering. You know me. I love pondering. Video games, Nintendo, it all gets me pondering. And boy, Nintendo Directs, they get me pondering harder than just about anything. Nintendo's about to have a classic big June Direct, you know, the E3 one, basically. And it feels good to be absolutely certain that it's coming. They announced it this time. We know it's coming. It's gonna be this week. Feels pretty good. And what's got me pondering so hard is the fact that this is definitely gonna be the Switch's final year. Nintendo will continue to support the system going forward for at least a few years, but we know that this is gonna be its last year as Nintendo's primary console. And it's got me thinking, do you think that this right here is gonna be the Switch's last Direct? That maybe this is gonna be the final major Nintendo Direct for the Switch? The final Direct in a world where the Switch is Nintendo's primary console and the quote-unquote Switch 2 does not exist yet. And it definitely might not be the last. We already missed a Direct in February, February, that one, the Direct for the first half of the year is a little bit more nebulous. It's often in February, but historically it's been in other months too. And, if Nintendo is gonna skip a Direct in a year, there's a pretty fine chance that it's gonna be that first one. But then next in line is June. There have been a few years where we just did not get one in June, but missing the February one basically guaranteed that we were gonna get one in June because then Nintendo, they're overdue to share news on stuff. But then the one that you can really rely on, the one that is the most consistent, is that September Direct. September Directs are almost always a sure thing. So it is possible that we get this Direct this month and then we get the usual September one too. But I don't know. I'm not feeling it this year. And the thing is, you can't predict Nintendo, even if there's a pattern, even if there is a precedent. You cannot predict what they're gonna do, and you especially can't predict anything in the last year of a system's life. Things are weird, things are just weird. Things are not gonna operate quite as they normally would. And in this case especially, of course, because the Switch 2 was coming out this year, and now it isn't. So that kind of throws everything out of whack. I'm sure it did on Nintendo's end too. They're probably scrambling to figure out what exactly they're gonna do. Things that originally might have been announced in a September Direct this year for next year, they might have to wait. Nintendo might just not have anything left to announce for the Switch after this Direct. I think most likely if the Switch 2 is going to release next spring, March, April, May, most likely it's going to follow about the same pattern that the Switch did. We'll get the reveal for the system itself later this year, but not reveals of any big games. They'll probably do what they did last time and just have a big presentation in, maybe January, sometime early in the year, just like the January 2017 one. That's where they reveal all the details about the console and all these different games. To me, that makes sense. And that would mean that there's essentially no real reason to have a September Direct this year. September is the one late in the year. So it is all about games for the following year. That's just the nature of the September Direct. And maybe that's why the September Direct has been so consistent. Because it's just the perfect place to give more info on games coming that holiday, and then to announce games for basically any time in the following year. But if most of next year's games are going to be Switch 2 games, they're not going to be ready to show us those games yet. So I think September is, it's possible, obviously, but I would not be surprised if it didn't happen. And if not, then this is it for Switch. One more Nintendo Direct. One more Direct to announce games for the rest of this year, and maybe some smaller titles for early next year leading up to the Switch 2. They're going to want something, again, they're going to keep supporting the Switch. So there are going to be games coming out for it. So yeah, I seriously would not be surprised if this really was it. And that's what I'm pondering about, because it's just a crazy idea. It's just a crazy idea that we are on the cusp of what is potentially the final Nintendo Direct exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. This generation has been crazy. It has been a heck of a ride. This was the generation where Nintendo Directs got really, really good. And I know I bring this up sometimes. You know, people who just got into Nintendo within this generation, like a lot of people, they don't know what Directs were like before the Switch. They were weird. There would often be almost nothing good announced, and they were long and awkward and uncomfortable, and they would focus on the wrong games, and they were still fun. We still tuned in. We still loved it. But like, this generation's Directs, they were really something else. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the fact that Nintendo merged the home console and handheld divisions, so they were just producing more games, especially more games for one platform, than ever. The Switch's library is so massive, and this is really something that I find interesting when people start comparing consoles and saying, the Switch isn't as good as such and such. The sheer number of games released on the Switch, it's absolutely mountainous. The library is gargantuan compared to previous generations. And so Directs have been just packed, absolutely jam-packed compared to the Directs of old. And of course, a lot of these Directs have been making dreams come true. You know, like Switch Directs, these had the biggest bombshells. The hype cycles were otherworldly. We had Smash with all the DLC, this ongoing multi-year thing. We had big stuff like Metroid Prime 4 and all the response to that, even if it hasn't happened yet. It was still a big deal. Metroid Dread, Pikmin 4, Mario Wonder, a bunch of Xenoblades, just tons and tons of Xenoblade stuff. It's not even worth listing it all. Just the list, it goes on and on. It was such an incredible generation for just hype, for humongous bombshell announcements. And so it's just crazy to think that we might be at the end of that. This has been the craziest, most exciting, and I would say the best delivering generation that Nintendo has ever had. So to be at the end, this right here could be the Switch's last hurrah. One last one final blast of hype before the Switch is overshadowed completely by its successor. And it will be overshadowed. It certainly will. The Switch is going to live on. We still have our Switches. Plenty of people will take a while to transition to Switch 2. Nintendo will continue to support the Switch. It will always be important. But once they announce that new one, that's where all eyes are going. That's where the hype is. That's where the news is. A system and its identity mostly comes down to the releases themselves. You know, if a system's gonna have a swan song or whatever, it's gonna be like a game that comes out. The Directs are sort of separated from the actual games that come out. A Direct is really just a presentation everybody watches and it's fun. But I would still say that, like, I don't know, like, culturally, I suppose, like, as far as that goes, Directs are very important, and I would say they are a very important part of a system's identity. Getting philosophical here, so just considering this final Direct could be in its own way the Switch's swan song. This could be the Switch taking one final bow and being like, here's the last of it. Here is essentially the last that I have to offer. Not the very last. Again, there will be more games, but the last bunch, the last exclusive bunch where everybody is still looking at the system. It's still the number one system on everyone's mind. It's still the only one that anyone's playing. It's just surreal. And you know, there's gonna be lots of time for videos like this. You know, maybe we're not quite ready for them yet, but the second the Switch 2 hype train starts rolling, we're gonna get all sorts of retrospectives and, you know, all these sentimental videos. Once the Switch 2 is really, really coming, we'll have time for that. You know, we'll be looking back on all the Switch's Directs, and I'm sure I'll do a a very similar lead-up video to the Switch 2 like I did with the Switch 1. We got time for that. But at least right now, at this moment, I can't help but just take a little moment to think about it. As far as us content creators and terminally online Nintendo enthusiasts, I very much count myself into both of those categories. As far as we're concerned, Nintendo Directs really are at the heart of the Nintendo experience. They're a really big deal. And if this does end up being the last one for the Switch, then we will look back on this one. This will end up being something of a historic Nintendo Direct in its own way. And that's not to say that I think that puts a lot of expectation on it to be huge and announce like it's the best Direct ever and announce all these bombshell games, because it doesn't really work that way. That doesn't really fit in with the plan. So in that way, it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice going into this potentially final Direct without like a ton of really big, crazy expectations. It's kind of nice, you know? It's like the performer doing the final bow, doing the final performance, but like there's not a bunch of pressure. We know they're about to retire. It's the easy victory lap, you know? They're just kind of getting up there, doing their thing, having a little fun, and we don't even care what happens. We're just happy that it happened, and we're happy to see them bow off gracefully. Happy about all the time that we had with them. One final round of applause, one final bow. Enjoy your retirement. You've earned it.